The Taliban has claimed responsibility for a devastating car bombing outside the Afghan capital of Kabul. The bombing, which killed at least 95 people, was the latest in a string of brazen attacks by the insurgent group. Here to weigh in is Fox News senior strategic analyst, General Jack Keane. General, nice to see you.
Good to see you, Leah. Welcome to Washington.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Well, so this is the third major urban assault by militants in less than a week. This happened in what's known as the Ring of Steel, which is supposed to be this sort of government-protected area. Your reaction to seeing this uptick in activity there?
Well, the Taliban normally have a spring offensive coming out of the harsh winter. I think this clearly is, we got this uptick largely from the Haqqani network, was a derivative of the Taliban. They conduct mostly all the attacks in Kabul, not every attack, but over the 16 years, the overwhelming majority of those attacks. I think they're supported by the Pakistanis. They have a safe haven inside of Pakistan. The United States policy is trying to push back on the Pakistanis. This is likely something of a reaction to that before the spring offensive begins. In other words, they're pushing back on U.S. policy.
I just recently spoke with a source at CENTCOM who told me that a lot of the air assets that were working on Syria have been moved over to sort of take the same strategy in Afghanistan, where in Syria they were going after the ISIS revenue sources like oil. Now in Afghanistan they're going after the drug facilities to try to go after some of the areas where they're creating revenue. What do you think of this strategy?
Well, I overall agree strategically with the Trump administration's position on Afghanistan. One, they made a decision to stay, and that's totally different than the position we were dealing with the previous administration. Secondly, they've decided to increase the resources, as you indicated, more lethal resources, and also a policy change. Afghanistan is the largest poppy field, which leads to heroin in the entire world, and now they have permission to go after the distribution centers that drive that outside the country and populate the world with that horrible drug. So yeah, and that's a major source of income for the Taliban. But the real problem, Leah, in Afghanistan, even when we do all of that, nothing will actually change to our favor unless we eliminate the two safe havens that the Taliban have in Pakistan. And cutting off the money with Pakistan is a first step. I'm talking about foreign aid. They'll make that up easily with the Chinese. Secondly, if Pakistan does not shut down the assistance they're providing at those safe havens, and I'm talking about intelligence on U.S. and Afghan operations, resources, if they don't stop that, then we have got to go after those ourselves. And this would be the first president that's ever made that decision.
I know this is so hard to see. You retired in 2003. I was deployed to Jalalabad, where one of these attacks occurred earlier this week. I was there back in 2008. So it's difficult for a lot of us to see this violence increasing. But I want to ask you about the strategy, the President Trump's strategy in Afghanistan. Is this violence that we're seeing any indication of how that's going, or is it too early to tell at this point?
Well, as I said, I think it's this violence is likely as a result of some kind of message sending to the administration that, we're still here and we're going to continue to push our objectives. We just got to be really tough on those sanctuaries or else we won't succeed.
Okay. Well, I've got you. I want to turn to Syria for a minute. Turkey basically started a military operation against the Kurds, the YPG, on January 20th. They want the U.S. to stop supporting the Kurds. I want to take a listen to what Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said earlier today. Take a listen.
What we hope is that Turkey is able to satisfy that it has addressed its security concerns on its border, and it can limit the amount of fighting that goes on, because clearly there are civilian casualties every time this happened, and we're already seeing those casualties. We also continue our dialogue with Turkey to address their legitimate concerns along the border.
Can you read between the lines for us a little bit on what Secretary of State Tillerson is really trying to say here?
Well, the United States policy on Syria, they've just went through a review and they just announced it. One is to try to get a political settlement in Syria without Assad. I think that's pure fantasy, because the Russians and the Iranians have had military success. They propped up the regime. Assad is going to stay as long as the Iranians and the Russians want him. They may switch him out at some point just for convenience sake, but there's not going to be a political settlement that's going to get him out of there. Number two, we want to push back on a al-Qaeda inside of Syria. Makes sense. We also want to stop the advance of the Iranians. To do both of those and also to prevent the return of ISIS, we need to enfranchise the Sunnis. That's why ISIS and Al-Qaeda exist, because they radicalize Sunnis. The Sunnis inside Syria are the majority, and they're politically disenfranchised. They've been crushed, largely because the Russians and the Syrians did that. The Russians, Syrians, and Iranians did it. But Obama refused to help the Syrian moderates, other than a small covert problem with anti-tank weapons. That has contributed to the problem we have. And until we resolve that issue, it's likely we're not going to have any success.
All right. Well, hopefully with this administration, we'll see some changes. General Jack Keane, thank you.
Good talking to you, Leah.
Nice to see you.